This is a short, poorly made YouTube video on how to modify an Italian-made Benelli M4 tactical shotgun that I use in 3-gun competitions to make it compliant with common sense gun laws. Specifically, I'm talking about the Code of Federal Regulations, commonly referred to as 922R. Let me get this off the table here, and we'll get started. So this gun, when imported from Italy, only holds, first let's check, make sure it's clear. Yes, it's clear. Nothing in the chamber, nothing in the carrier. Nothing in the magazine, weapon's clear. So this gun, as imported from Italy, holds 5 rounds. Let's get all these pieces parts out. Here's the magazine tube that comes on the weapon as it's imported. It'll hold 5 rounds in the tube. I only have 4 dummy rounds, so I can't really demonstrate. Well, I got a double lock buck here I can throw in here. So it holds 5 in the tube. Now, in 3-gun shoots, when you have 20 targets on a course, you really want 7 in the tube, because I have to reload 3 times when everybody else is only reloading twice, and that's assuming that they hit the target every time. Let me get the rest of these parts out and we'll walk you through what we got to do. So what I did in a prior YouTube video that's on this channel is I added this factory OEM magazine tube that now allows me to put 7 rounds in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it'll hold 7. Like so. So now it holds 7. When the weapon's imported, the government says that there are 13 recognized parts made in Italy. 13 recognized parts of the gun. When you modify it to go from 5 rounds to 7, you can no longer have any more than 10 parts made from Italy. The rest has to be made in the United States. So we're going to replace some of these parts to make it legal. The foregrip is one of them. This was, you can see, made in the USA. So we're going to replace the foregrip, and even though this is 2 pieces, they consider it 1. We're going to replace the trigger, and we're going to replace the follower. The follower goes in the magazine tube. It's that right there. That plug. Now really, I do need to say that I had previously also on the other YouTube video replaced the single piece stock with a collapsible stock. And common sense gun laws in the United States now say that this is 2 pieces, even though this is 1 piece. It says this is 2 pieces. So now I really have 14 Italian-made parts on the gun, and I can only have 10. Now, going back to the 5-round, 7-round thing, you could, on the old tube, where's my old tube? You can, on the old tube, have 7 rounds in the gun, because you can have 5 in the tube, 1 in the chamber, and 1 in the carrier, if you ghost load it. But when you do 3-gun matches, oftentimes the course officials don't let you start the course with 1 in the chamber, and depending on the official, they get a little sketchy about having 1 in the carrier and ghost loading the weapon prior to course start. So really you're limited to 5 rounds, and in a 20 target shotgun course, you want 7 rounds in there, so you only have to reload twice. So let's tear it down and replace these parts. So there's only 10 parts on the gun made in Italy. We'll start with the cap. I call it the Jesus nut because it holds the whole thing together. If there's any other pilots watching, they know that the Jesus nut on an airplane is commonly referred to as the one that holds the propeller onto the front of the airplane, because if it comes off in flight, you hear a collective expletive from the cockpit occupants of Jesus. But I call it the Jesus nut because it holds the whole thing together. So take that off, slide it up, take the foregrips off, slide the barrel off. Now, I was supposed to hold the bolt back before I did that, so we'll lock the bolt back. You should lock the bolt back before you take that apart. Now, lightly let the bolt go forward. We're going to get the trigger out. In order to get the magazine tube out that I had replaced, on the other YouTube video you'll see that to get the old one out, you have to take a heat gun and heat the blue Loctite in here up to, oh, I forget the temperature, but you got to get it pretty hot, and then this will just thread out. But we just need to get the trigger assembly out. So what's the tools you need? You need a takedown tool. We'll use a Hornady 223 round for this pin with the bolt forward. Use your takedown tool to punch the pin out. Pull it out the other side. Push the bolt forward. Push the release. And the trigger assembly comes right out. So we have to, now the trigger assembly's out, the hammer's back. You'll want to put your thumb on the hammer and release it lightly, not like I just did, so it doesn't go slamming forward. To get the trigger out, it's this pin. Not that one, this one. And you can tell because it rotates on that pin. I'll take the new trigger and lay it next to it so you can see. It's that pin that holds the trigger in. Now, the Hornady round is not going to get that pin out, so you really need like a nail, something to push that pin out. And there's one spring you got to be concerned with, one that you have to contend with. I shouldn't have pushed it out that side, but that's okay. We'll figure it out. I let a spring go flying. We'll get it in a minute. You pull that pin out, and the trigger comes out. Now, if you look on the floor, I've put a quilt for the exact reason of what just happened, because the spring went flying, and now I get to try to find it on my white quilt, but I don't think it landed.
It's not on there.
Huh?
It's not on there. So
I'll have to use a flashlight. So I'll use a nail to get this trigger out. You'll see that there's a spring here. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a wire spring through the trigger pin. You don't want to push this side out because then you have to contend with that spring. So push the pin out from the other side. And when you pull it out, don't pull it all the way out to where that spring flies out. This is the only spring you have to contend with. It's the trigger spring. The trigger will come right out, and notice the pin's still in there. And I didn't pull it all the way out, so I don't have to contend with this spring. I only have to contend with the one spring, the spring that's on the trigger. So with that pin out, here's your trigger. There's a disconnector on the trigger that will also qualify as one of the 10 USA components, but I couldn't find it in the USA right now. I have to wait for somebody to make it. Everybody's sold out. So actually, because I have 14 Italian-made parts on this gun, until I can find a disconnector or a hammer, I couldn't find a hammer in the USA either, I have to take the two-piece stock back off and put the single-piece stock back on to stay compliant. And then when I get a hammer or a disconnector, I'll replace one of those, and I can put the collapsible stock from Italy back on. So here's our trigger. The spring that flew out goes in this hole. And I'm going to take that spring out. So it's going to go in the new one, the new trigger. But I don't really need to put it in there yet. I have to get the disconnector out. The disconnector is also this pin. There's a spring down in the trigger body, so you got to contend with that spring when you remove the disconnector. Push the pin out. It's itty bitty, so be careful. You might want to put paper towel, a white towel or a quilt or something on the floor that's white, so that if it goes flying, you can find it easier. The spring is down inside here. So I have that spring. Now I can take my new trigger, put the spring for the disconnector in there, line up the disconnector, hold it down, and drop the pin back in. Now, with a USA-made trigger, what I found is the finishing on the pin is a little bit too tight for tolerance, so you need a hammer to tap that pin in there. The tolerances weren't really good when they machined that hole for the pin. So now I have my disconnector spring in there, and my disconnector's in there, and I've got US stamped on it for any official that makes me disassemble the weapon and prove it's 922R compliant. Now let's put the trigger back into the trigger housing. So remember, this spring, the only one that you had to contend with until you took out the disconnector, goes in this hole. And here comes the fun part. Getting the trigger, and I wished I had found a black one because the Benelli one was black, but I couldn't find a black one. So we'll drop the trigger in there. It's easier to hold it upside down so that spring doesn't fall. And this is the fun part, getting the pin into the hole of the trigger. It's often easier, I can tell you this, if you turn it upside down, push the pin down on the table, and then just wiggle. And that way the pin goes into the trigger. So now we're good. Hammer back. Trigger works. So we're in good shape. Before you put the trigger assembly back into the weapon, you got to have the hammer back. But remember, we also need to replace the foregrip with made in the USA. These were made in Italy. These are made in the US. Common sense gun laws. I have to throw these away because the plastic was molded in Italy, and put these on because the plastic was molded in the United States. And I have to replace the follower. The follower is kind of fun. We'll do that with snap ring pliers. Let me grab those pliers. Snap ring pliers. You'll need these to replace the hammer when you go to replace the hammer in the trigger housing. You also need them to get the follower out and to get this retention ring, the snap ring, out of the end of the magazine tube. Let's move a lot of this stuff out of the way. And this is what we'll do now. Really, you should have the gun in a vise, and you should wear eye protection. So I'm going to put my thumb over this, my whole hand. I'm going to squeeze the snap ring, and this thing's going to come flying out. Let's do it like this, so it can hit me in the body. Squeeze. So much fun. This was the most painful part, by the way, of replacing the magazine tube. So the snap ring, again, the pliers just go in the holes. You just squeeze it, and the spring comes out. So we'll take the spring out, and we'll dump the Italian-made follower out. Here it comes. There's the Italian-made follower. Aluminum and plastic. Aluminum for the new one. We'll slide it in. There we go. Common sense gun laws. We're making this gun legal. Spring back in. And the fun part, without a vise, is going to be getting this bad boy back in here. This could prove to be very amusing. It already is, in a sense. It's in a little bit, but it needs to be in farther. ease and shove. There we go. I'm going to put it in just slightly more. So now I've replaced follower, component 1. Trigger, component 2. I hate that it's not black though, but oh well. Who cares about aesthetics? As long as I can have 7 rounds in the gun for the 3 gun shoots. So I replaced 1, 2. The third piece, which one's the USA made, so I stay compliant with common sense gun laws. These are made in the US. Perfect. So let's put this thing back together. First, we need our takedown tool. We'll use the nail instead of the 223 round. Pull the pin out. Bolt forward. And you see the release. I don't know if you can see that in there. The bolt release has to be squeezed in. Take your trigger assembly. Drop it in. Pull it up a little bit. Got to find the sweet spot for the hole. That stinks. I'm having trouble finding it. Little wiggles. I'm going to lay it down and just wiggle the whole trigger housing. There we go. Pins in. And I shouldn't have done that, but it's okay. Bolt stays back. We're in good shape. So the trigger assembly's back in. We've got our new follower in. Let's show you that. I'll show you that after we get it assembled. Let's put it back together first. There we go. Let's put our barrel back on. Slide the barrel on. Get it almost seated all the way. Not quite all the way. I went all the way. Gotta slide it back up a little bit. And on your foregrips, there's a left and a right. This is the right one. Put it in up top up here. Left one. It'll go. Now, slide the barrel down. And we're in good shape. There's our new USA made foregrip. All we have to do is put the Jesus nut back on. Give it a go. Bolt forward, bolt back. You can see our new follower in there. It's not the same. I'll hold the old one up there too. So piece 1, trigger, piece 2, and foregrip, piece 3. So of the 13 components that were imported on this weapon, now I only have 10 that were made in the US. That's not quite right because remember this counts as 2. So I will be replacing the collapsible stock back with this, and it just simply threads off in here. Function test. Let's try function test if I can find some rounds. Alright, function test. Let the bolt go forward. And let's put some dummy rounds in. These are not real rounds, they're dummy rounds, courtesy of Guy Menace here in Evansville. 1, 2, 3. Now we can drop one in the carrier. Get loaded. Drop one in the carrier. Drop one in the carrier. It works. Now the cool thing about this weapon, one more thing I'll show you before we end this, is for 3-gun shoots, you can load this with the weapon still shouldered. Because as you're shooting, you can grab rounds from your waist and feed them in. So that's one nice thing about the Benelli for 3-gun matches. So we're rock and rolling. And that's our short YouTube video. There's another video that shows you how to replace the magazine tube and the buttstock. Thanks.